going to start by giving a little bit of information about the Chamber of Commerce. So the Chamber of Commerce is an organization, for those of you who aren't familiar. We're responsible for we're designed to promote and protect the business interests of businesses here in Greater Vancouver, Southwest Washington. And we also have quite a few members that are across the river down in Portland. We have different areas. We have workshops. We have advocacy that we do on your behalf to make sure that there's a healthy business climate. And we also have a lot of promotions to raise companies' awareness. This particular one we're going to be working on today is the Mind What Matters webinar series. And this is to get information into the hands of companies. And we'll do this type of webinar often. And we that you'll continue to join us, because we do find that companies find this extremely valuable. And if we can get content in your hands, then we've done our job. So today we're talking about Mind What Matters. And I am going to tell you a little bit about myself on the grant process, because I think that's important. I have around 22 years of grant writing experience and managing large federal grants. That is 22 years longer than most people would like to look at grants and regulations. But I find that managing a good grant program means that we can get more funding in order to give companies like you. So today we're going to do each other a favor. We're going to learn about grants, how to be successful at grants, how to apply for grants, and we're going to also talk about managing grants and what that looks like from our perspective, to give you a better understanding of what that might look like. So the better that we do in managing grants for you means our region gets more money. So it's a good trade-off. I started off managing grants at approximately $6 million for my last organization. And slowly, with the regulatory process and being in compliance, we call that being in compliance, when you manage a grant and you get audited and you have a good check mark from the federal government that says you've managed a great program. We had been able to grow that program to $15.5 million. And that's slowly, but that's $15.5 million that gets into the hands of our region's companies. So that is why it's extremely important for us to be providing you this content today, and for the Chamber of Commerce to be able to provide grants for our small businesses that are being affected by the COVID pandemic. So our next slide, and I'm hoping you can see this with me. So today's goal is for you guys to win a grant. We want our companies to win a grant. We want you to understand the grant process. We want to lessen the frustrations of the grant process and at least help you understand the process just a little bit more. My goal is also to help granting agencies. So there might be some organizations on the call today or on the webinar that are a granting organization. We call you guys funding bodies. So we're a funding body. I want to help educate if there's anything that I can help provide. But we also want to make sure that you also have a big pool of qualified candidates that are ready to receive money, because the Chamber of Commerce is not the only one in this region that gives money to small businesses and medium-sized businesses in the area. We're one of many. And we're going to talk a little bit about more that today. So this presentation, one of the things that I do want to talk about is what it's not going to cover. So this particular presentation is not going to cover a specific grant. If you are here because you've applied for a grant, maybe through the Chamber of Commerce, you were not invited because you were denied. So you were invited because we want to make you even stronger in the application process. We're also not going to be talking about specific grants of any kind, how to get grants. We're not going to talk about what happened with maybe a grant that you applied for through another organization. Hopefully this is just going to be informational on the generic topic of grants. So unfortunately today we can't answer any questions specifically about grants that you have applied for in the past. But if you want to take that offline, we're more than happy to talk to you about that. So let's talk a little bit about what a grant is. A grant is economic aid authorized and appropriated through bills that are passed by Congress and signed by the President of the United States. So funding that comes, it can come from private, it can come from public sector, it can come from foundations, it can come from a number of areas. Today, we're going to be focusing on those funding bodies that are from the federal government, but I'll try and walk you through a little bit more about if that grant comes from another source. You might say, I'm applying to a grant through the Greater Vancouver Chamber of Commerce. I'm not applying through the federal government. You are. you are applying for a grant that came from the federal government. It might be administered. We talked about funding bodies in the last slide. It might be administered by the Columbia River Economic Development Council. It might be administered by the Chamber of Commerce or a number of other nonprofit organizations, but those oftentimes are coming directly from the federal government by way, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide, but it'll be coming by way of oftentimes the state or the county. So one of the things to remember are grants are not free money. And I can't say this enough. Grants are not free money. They are payments that just don't have to be repaid. One thing that we don't want to have happen is for us to start using them free money, because with free money tends to mean you can do whatever you want with it. And there are stipulations when you apply for a grant. So I say, let's not confuse that with the stimulus money that we often hear about in the news. We received one before that has open-ended ways that you can spend that doesn't have any earmarks towards it. When you apply for a grant, those do not need to be repaid, but they are utilized for a very specific purpose oftentimes and outlined in the application in which you're going to be applying for. Okay, so grants are usually highly competitive, which hopefully that's why you're here, get a little bit of a competitive advantage. All the funding that is provided is to provide a goal, right? So the federal government, the state government actually provides money to make sure that you fit a specific goal. So let's say we apply for a grant and we say we want it to go towards housing. We want it to go towards homeless crisis. We are going to be using that money specifically earmarked for those particular topics. So usually grants, oftentimes, most times, grants have a very specific funding objective. One of the things to keep in mind is grants are always for discrete standalone projects. They have a beginning and they have an end date. Very rarely do they not have an end date. And then usually organizations like the ones we have here in on this call won't be a part of grants that are open-ended, but they usually are not for ongoing funding. So if you think of a grant and you say, great, I can pay for an employee for the next year or so, or I can pay for rent or utilities, that's typically not what a grant is meant for. It's meant for a short period of time. Can it be for a rent or utilities? Yes, but usually rent or utilities maybe from August through November or January through March. So we'll look at those very specific timelines, and grants oftentimes can be open all year round. So while we might have grants that are open for a 2-3 week period, there are grants out there, and we'll talk a little bit more about where to find them. There are grants out there that are open all year long, and we want to make sure that you know where to find those and have success in applying for those. So you don't have to apply for a grant through the Chamber of Commerce. You actually can, as an organization, apply for many grants directly through the federal government, maybe through your county, maybe through your state, your health department, et cetera. So there's a lot of different ways that we'll talk about how you can apply for grants. All grants are not created equal, and I think that's really important. So one of the things that I often hear is, Janet, I don't qualify for the grant. Thanks for letting me know, but I was already denied last week or 2 weeks ago or last month, or I already received PPP money. Keep in mind, these are completely different grants with completely different set of objectives. So if you applied for one grant and it had a specific requirement or eligibility and you didn't meet that, please start applying for more grants, because they're not all created equal and they all have a different objective for the most part. So because you were denied for one means you can absolutely apply for another one. The next slide. So we're going to go over how federal grants are formed. This is not to confuse everybody. And if there's anybody here who loves this stuff as much as I do, shoot me an email and we'll have coffee, because you'll be the second person that I've met. Federal grants are formed. I think this is really important for you guys to understand that federal grants have background. There's a reason they were formed. And hopefully the information that I'll provide here on this particular slide, I'm not going to go into great detail unless you want to offline, but I think it's important for you to understand the grant making process. So grant making agencies, that is USDA, that is Department of Commerce, that is Department of Defense. The CARES grants that you guys talk about and you hear about, that is through the Department of Treasury. So we start with a grant making agency is what we call them. The grant making agencies are parts of the federal government. Oftentimes they're the cabinets that we recognize, but there's other agencies. Many of them administer grants. So it might be that the Department of Health wants a certain grant to go out for healthcare providers or in the healthcare space. Department of Defense might have a specific grant that they want to issue for a certain objective to get it in the hands of contractors or others in the Department of Defense. For the CARES Act, it's the Treasury Department. And the Treasury Department is actually the one that created the grant in the first place years ago, and the SBA is stepping up to manage that grant. So this is the time that a grant is formed. You're not gonna have to know about anything else but that. It's formed here. What's most important is the next one, and that's the OMB. And you'll hear that in the news. That's the Office of Management and Budget. So the Office of Management and Budget are the ones that create the policies and the regulations. They are the budget arm of the government. They serve the President of the United States and in overseeing the implementation of and the vision of the executive branch. Again, you won't need to know this, but I think it's very important for companies to understand the background of grants, how they're formed, and that might get you a better understanding of the information that you might be asked on certain grant applications and the importance of getting that information right. So the Office of Management and Budget, their whole mission is almost like the IRS. They are wanting to meet policy, budget, management, regulatory requirements to fulfill the grant making agency, which is in our case, the Treasury Department. The Treasury Department already outlined what CARES Act is for, what they want to see, and all of the requirements. So that happens at the grant making agency. OMB, again, is IRS. They're going to tell you how to spend the money. They're going to allocate the money. They're not going to give money. They're going to appropriate. And that just means earmarking the money. And then it goes on back to the grant making agency and disseminated throughout the United States. So when we talk about where that is disseminated, the federal agency, let's say the department, the Treasury Department, they, in this particular instance for CARES Act, they've given it to other federal agencies. They have provided grants to states, and then those states have provided grants to counties. Those counties have then provided grants, sub-grants, pass through to organizations like the Chamber of Commerce. So the Chamber of Commerce manages grants and that come directly from the federal government by way of the county and the state, and oftentimes the grant making agency. So the important part is the grant comes to you. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how you get prepared when the grant comes to you. We have a couple of organizations on the webinar that want to become a grantor. And a grantor is a Chamber of Commerce. It could be a CREDC. It could be other nonprofits that have the great opportunity to get a grant and give it to companies and use it where it's needed. So grantors have a great responsibility, and I say they also have very great risk, but the reward for us is immeasurable because we can get money into the hands of companies that need it most, and that's the most important part. So if you're a grantor on the phone, on the webinar, we're going to talk very briefly. So I would highly recommend that you understand the legislation, get very familiar with the statutes that build this grant and how it was formed, why it was formed. I would definitely seek guidance under the legislation. You'll want to seek expert guidance. You'll want to understand the audit requirements. You'll want to understand the audit cost, because there's a great cost, right, to managing a grant program. And then there's also administrative requirements that are going to be needed. What are in-kind contributions? Are there anything, contributions that are required? So as grantors, if you want any more information offline and want to talk about becoming a grantor or what makes you more competitive, we'll do that on another webinar. Let us know if that's something you're interested in. But one thing to make sure, we always make sure that we know our grant principles and our cost principles, which is going to be important. Now, let's get prepared. So with companies on the call, Our goal here is to make sure that you're prepared. Because you applied for another grant and were turned down again, you can always get prepared for another grant. So our goal here is to make sure you walk away with more information and are able to look at grants, hopefully in a new way. So I would recommend at this stage, when you're starting to get prepared, read those requirements. Every grant has requirements. Every grant has qualifications and disqualifications. This is going to be really key for you because, one, we don't want you to waste your time, because sometimes these grants can take a considerable amount of time. Sometimes they don't take a lot of time, but it can be a lot of time on the administrator's portion. So one thing to keep in mind, and we look at it this way in our chamber office, if we have a grant and we have 500 companies who have applied for the grant, meaning we have to review 500. If we have 500 companies that all miss one piece of information that takes us 5 minutes to go look it up or to change it, that's 42 hours of work for those just 500. And one of the things that we see during grant process over the years is that there's always mistakes that can be rectified with some proofreading and some additional effort on behalf of the companies. And oftentimes some of these mistakes are going to cause you to lose out on a grant opportunity. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But 42 hours to fix one mistake. It could be you didn't put your email in right, and we'll talk about that. Those are little mistakes, but those do take a lot of time away from the grantors. And when that happens, oftentimes grantors at all different levels, if there's mistakes, automatic disqualification. We're going to kick it out because we don't have enough time or staff to look up the correct information for you on your behalf. Will we sometimes? Absolutely. And it really depends, but it's not just the chamber grants we're talking about now. We're talking about grants throughout the United States. So that's going to be important. Some of them will provide you with a complete copy of the grant. So it could publish and say, listen, our grant's going to go live in 1 week. Here are the exact questions. That is a helpful tip. So if you have enough turnaround time in order to look at those questions and get your answers ready, I would highly recommend take the time, get them ready. That's going to help you be competitive right from the get-go, that you can have the information at the ready to sign up as soon as that grant goes live. Leaving items off of your grant, transposing numbers are really our grounds for immediate disapproval of grants in most cases. So we're going to talk a little bit about the importance. Couple of things that we're going to have you guys get ready. Companies. We are going to make sure that you have this proper information on hand as if you would a crisis management plan. So a lot of companies around the area, we have a crisis management plan. If something happens, it could be a PR crisis management plan. We have things that we know at the ready if something were to hit, that we're ready with to hit the media, get information, lock down information. There's a number of things that we do as organizations to be prepared for a number of things. Grant making is, grant applying is no different. So we're going to talk tax ID number. One of the things that we have is a federal tax ID number. This might be very basic for some people on the call, but there is a great need for this type of information, so bear with me. The tax ID number, your EIN number, that's your federal number. We're going to have a slide when you go back to the show floor. You're going to be able to look that up if you don't know it. There's a UBI number, and that's a state number. So the tax ID is federal. The UBI number is for the state, and that allows you to do business in the state of Washington. So you might not have a UBI number if you're a sole proprietor. That's fine. One of the things that I would ask you to do is check with your bookkeeper, check with your accountant, check with a CPA firm. Find out if you need one or if you should have one. Because oftentimes, if you're a sole proprietor, because you don't have employees in a couple other areas, you don't have a UBI number, you use your social security number in a lot of cases. If you don't want to use your social security number, apply for a UBI number. Anybody can apply for a UBI number that's a sole proprietor. So that's just something you might want to consider, making sure that you have a UBI if you don't want your social security number floating out there. Then we're also going to look at the DUNS number, and a DUNS number is it's a Dun & Bradstreet. And don't confuse that with a sales arm of Dun & Bradstreet. They can be a very valuable company on one end, but the DUNS number is a number that a majority of companies have. You might not know it. It is self-supplied information, but a lot of times we as grantors grantors are required by the federal government to pull a report on everybody receiving federal dollars through us. And that DUNS number is going to tell us a couple of things. It's going to give some background on you, but mostly what we're looking for is that you're not disbarred. So there are companies that are out there, unfortunately, who have taken advantage of federal dollars, and they're disbarred from taking any grant funding, usually for a period of time, let's say 3 years, 5 years. We need to prove on your behalf that you are not disbarred. So usually, if there's no information, that's good information. But if you do have one, it has an active status, that just helps us move the grant on a little bit quicker. Check your business license. I can't say this enough, and I'm going to give you an example on this call. So as companies were registering over the last week for this particular webinar, I went on and I found a handful of companies. I chose 10 out of those that were pre-registered, and I looked up your business license with the Department of Revenue and the Secretary of State. There's 3 of you currently on this call, you may know, you may not know, that are delinquent, that are listed as delinquent, and there's one company that is listed as administratively dissolved. I say this because you guys need to know. You need to know your business status license. I would check it regularly. Make sure it's active. The one thing I can let you know is we look that up and we're required to report on it. So if you show up as delinquent, if you show up as administratively dissolved, everything stops, right? We can't move further. Even if you call and say, Janet, but I didn't know, or that's because of something I got taken care of a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, or that's because my business partner, we can't move on. We can't pass on that information. That's a dead stop for us. So when we get back to the floor after this presentation is done, I would encourage everybody, take a look at that flag, that little banner that's on the side that says, check your business license. Go on, check the Secretary of State, check the Department of Revenue, make sure you're in active status. That would help us out. That will help you out. I know that there are companies who really need this grant who were listed as delinquent or administratively dissolved. So it could be as easy as you gave a wrong number. I would recommend when you look at your tax ID number, your UBI number, your DUNS number, make sure you know them. As a business owner or an executive in your company, know them. Don't rely on somebody else knowing them. Please don't rely on your bookkeeper knowing the information, because I can tell you there were dozens of companies over the last couple of years who couldn't get a hold of their bookkeeper. They couldn't get a hold of somebody when they needed information. Their bookkeeper left and they forgot to get the information, didn't know how to log on. So this information is company specific. It doesn't follow your bookkeeper. So if your bookkeeper does your taxes and everything, great. Make sure that you also have access to that information as an owner. Put a cheat sheet together. I know a lot of organizations put a cheat sheet together with all of this information so you can apply for grants. And oftentimes grants will pop up and say, you've got a week to do this, or we need this in for 3 days. You'd be surprised how many, unfortunately, are at the last minute, but that's the world we live in right now with companies and organizations trying to get money out to those companies that are affected. So let's check your information and make sure that when you put the information into our systems or any grant system, that it's correct. So most of the grants that we get, and grants all throughout the country, are well oversubscribed. So if we have $1 million to give away, I can bet we'll have $5 million, $10 million in requests, which is going to make this topic very important for those of you who want to be the first one to get your complete information through any grant portal. So we're going to get you prepared. Now we're going to talk about your financials. This is going to be important, and I'm going to piggyback on what we said on the last slide. Business owners, it's very important that you become very familiar with your financials. A lot of times we see business owners say, that's the bookkeepers, I don't even look at it. Or I run the front of the restaurant, I don't even look at it. That's going to be unfortunate, because you're going to be oftentimes required to be the one filling out the documentation, and you might lose a staff person and not have access to that information. So just make sure that you're aware of where your financials are. Let's make sure that you're aware how you file. Do you know if you file annually? Do you file quarterly? What do you file? Do you file monthly? What does that look like? And where can you upload your information, and where can you download it, most importantly? So if we need something from you at the last minute, that you're able as a business owner to download that information on a weekend, and we can get that entered into the system. So with your financials, nonprofits, if you're a nonprofit on this call, please make sure that you have profit and loss statements prepared and your board looks at them. This is a requirement of most nonprofits anyway, but we want to make sure that you have those available and have those at the ready. So that's important. When we start talking to companies about their profit and loss statements, it's not just their P&Ls. Do you file tax returns? Where's your L&I filings? All of this information you should be aware of and make sure you have documented somewhere in case somebody needs to get access to that information. So when we start talking about financials, some companies say, listen, I'm really small. I file at the end of the year. I don't have a need for monthly filing. What we're going to say as a grantor, unfortunately, is this particular grant may require you to know your financials month by month. So if you don't do financials month by month, then this grant is not for you. I would recommend all the companies on this call, if you don't have monthly profit and loss statements, even basic ones, it doesn't need to be one like a chamber would put together or Amazon would put together, but it's a very basic but necessary piece of information for small businesses running an organization. We also have quite a few companies. If you go to the Greater Vancouver Chamber of Commerce webpage, vancouverusa.com, there's a directory on there, and there is a number of really great bookkeepers, CPAs that can help small companies put these together on a regular basis and be your right arm to make sure that you have the information available for you, especially as we get through the grant season with this pandemic and recovery. So financials are going to be very important. Please get to know them and make sure that your management staff, if they have access to them, or if you want them to have access to it, that they have access and know how to pull it. The next thing we're going to talk about is following instructions, and that's going to be really important for us because application guidance is very carefully thought out, and the instructions for particular organizations, organization of your materials and information that they need, we as reviewers get very accustomed to reading a direct order, right, of materials. So if a grant says we'd like you to provide month 1 here, month 2 here, a W-9 here, and a tax return here, please do it in that order. Usually it'll tell you what order they want it in. Please don't just put it anywhere because, again, there are going to be grant making agencies who don't have enough time. If they're looking through 1,000 different ones, they're going to go directly to those that put the information according to the guidelines. So I think paying attention to the order and following the instructions are going to be very key. It seems simple, guys, but it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen a lot, I will say. We're actually, as a granting organization, and this is over 15, 20 years for me, if a company follows the rules, we remember them. We know who you are because sometimes it's so rare to find somebody who puts the information in correctly. So I think the pre-preparation is going to help you guys with that process. We're going to ask you to keep it brief and concise. So you're going to do exactly what I'm not doing now. You're going to keep it brief. You're going to keep it concise, give thoughtful answers. Don't omit data. Don't explain data if it's not asked for. So if you add unnecessary documents and information, oftentimes that's just bogging down the system. And oftentimes that could be a reason for them to kick out the grant. So I would say keep it brief, keep it concise, give them the information that the grantor is looking for. If you're looking for labeling documents, if let's say you have a document that you had to make in-house, make sure all of it's labeled. So all the documents you would ever upload to a grant, one thing, make sure it has your name on it, the company name, make sure it has your tax ID number, your UBI number, have all of that information on every single piece of information that you're uploading. Because if a piece of information gets missed, or if it's lying on a table somewhere, there's no way to tell oftentimes what piece of information goes to a company if it misses the paper clip or misses a part of, or maybe you did it out of order in the system. We want to make sure that your document is labeled so that we can attach it to the right application. Now we're going to talk about email addresses. Okay, we are going to ask you Any grant that you apply for, again, it seems typical, put your right email address in there. So we have oftentimes, we have companies that misspell their email addresses. You won't get information. Check your spam folder, check your junk folder. Make sure that you're looking for information from any of the grantors that you've applied for. The email address is going to be very, very important, because oftentimes this is the only way people can communicate with you. And if you don't meet that next deadline, your application is kicked out. And we don't want that to happen. We want you to get the grant. We want you to receive the information and have enough time in order to provide the backup documentation that might either be missing or moving on to another phase of the application. When we look at the phone number, it's going to be the same reason. We're going to ask you to check your phone number, check it twice, because if the email address doesn't work, or sometimes we just might use the phone number instead. If we have a quick turnaround time, we are going to call you. And what we often find is people giving other people's phone numbers. We often find organizations that use their main number, but they don't work on the weekend. So they're not checking anything that might come on Friday. So I would say if you are applying for something and you want access to that information, you want to get that call because this grant means a lot to your organization, please provide a phone number that will get to you the quickest. One of our chamber staff said, check your email as if you're about to win the lottery. You want to have every opportunity and make sure that the most basic information is correct and will reach you at any hour, because sometimes we do need to call you at 5:30 p.m. in order to get some information. The quantifiable numbers, we're going to talk about adding meaningful information. For us, this is really important. If the grant allows you for more written answers, make sure that it's meaningful answers. A lot of times, if you're applying for grants, it could be through foundations, it could be through organizations that are not the federal government. They might ask you more open-ended questions. The one thing that I will say is don't lean on the obvious. Don't give them the population numbers of Clark County. We have that. We know that, but you will talk about some of the data of your particular demographic or your subset, or the performance indicators that you're wanting to meet with that particular grant. So showcasing that you know exactly how you're going to use the money, what you're going to use it for, and that you know your data oftentimes will get you a leg up. Okay, so when we talk about information that is disqualifying, so if we say, you're disqualified if you have, if you want to use a particular grant for payroll, right? So it says it on the grant material, it says it on the website. It might even actually say it on the number that you're applying to. How many times do you think people put payroll in? It's a lot. We don't want that to happen to you, because here's what's happening. If we say this grant is not used for payroll, but it's used for 10 other items, and then in there it says, now what are you going to use it for? And you say, I'm going to use it for payroll, because you didn't read any of the instructions. We don't know how much is for payroll. It gets kicked out. We don't want it to get kicked out. So pay attention to the information that's being asked and the guidance that the grant and the application is giving you. So if it says that you're not eligible because you have more than 50 employees, if you have 60 employees, but you might not next year, or maybe you can get rid of 10. We don't want you to get rid of 10. But there are companies who will toe that line. Don't apply for it. Let's apply for one that you do fit for. They're out there. So if this particular grant that you might be focused on isn't for you, let's find you one that does. And there's a number of opportunities for that. So again, all grants are not created equal. Proofread your information. So each document, again, uploaded with information, pay close attention to that confirmation message. Every time you submit an application, it might be fleeting, it might be very brief, it might be a flash on the screen, it could be an email that comes to you. Make sure you have that. I would even be ready to screenshot it. If it is something that flashes really briefly, just make sure you're ready when you hit submit, that you're ready to either screenshot it or go and find the email confirmation for you. Helpful tips. So we're going to talk about Helpful tips. These are little things that oftentimes get overlooked. If the grant doesn't ask the question, don't elaborate or provide a story. That's going to be really important, because I know you are wanting this grant, right? We sign up for a grant. We so desperately need grants nowadays for companies' survival. Unfortunately, when we look at the reason grants are made, or even that compliance that we have to abide by that we talked about at the federal government level at the earlier slide, by you providing elaborate information, or maybe information about how you need this, even though you don't qualify, if you put in there, I know we don't qualify, but then you're applying for the wrong grant. So make sure, if they don't ask a question, don't answer it. Make sure we're looking at the right grant opportunities. If the grant asks you for a dollar amount, this is going to be really key. If anybody has used an Excel spreadsheet ever, raise your hand. If you have a dollar amount that's being asked of you and you put in 10K, the letter K, or if you put in 10,000, but I'll take whatever, or any commentary, just put the number in there. If they're asking for a dollar amount, they're asking for a dollar amount. If they want a justification, they might ask that in the next question. But help administrators out, because oftentimes if the column doesn't compute, it can get kicked out. So they're really looking for currency figures in there, not currency and then a dialogue. Might seem rough, and I know you might have a lot of things to say, but this particular area is not the time to say it. And we don't want your grant to get kicked out from organizations' websites or other grants, because again, they all come in different shapes and sizes. I am going to ask everybody here to know your legal name, your legal business name. Hopefully you know your legal name, but your legal business name is going to be required on documentation. And what we find is there are organizations that don't know their legal business name, or know it and don't use their legal business name, or they have people in their organization filling out documents for them, or like a grant, and they don't know their legal business name. So if your UBI, your tax number, does not match with your legal business name, then that's going to be important for you to know. I just heard a bell. So the legal business name should go on all the documents. When in doubt, just use it. Follow the social media pages. So the Columbia River Economic Development Council, your city, your state social media, the Chamber of Commerce, we are going to notify people about grant opportunities as soon as we get them. So you're going to want to be tuned in, let other companies know. That is where you're going to find a lot of the local grant information that you'll have available to you. So that's important. Now we're briefly going to talk about fraud prevention. This one is important because there are companies and organizations that look very similar to the federal government that are not the federal government. So there's things that we want to make sure with companies, and oftentimes desperation to get that grant, we want to make sure that you don't get scammed, right? So protect your business. Know the source of the grant. Where is it coming from? Where is it coming through? What is the name of it? And then go and research it. Don't provide your bank account information. Whatever you do, grants don't ask you for bank account information. It might later down the road when you're in contract, after you know the organization, you've researched them, and you know who you're working with, but you want to be very confident that you know who you're working with on the bank account before you give any bank account information. If you're told that you're selected to receive a grant, don't do it. Very rarely are people selected, if ever, for a grant. So if you receive an email that says you've been pre-selected, you know, we all receive that information in the mail as well. It's a spam, it's a phishing technique. And if you do find one that's bona fide, send it my way. But we're not going to respond to ones that say you're pre-selected. If you have questions, you can contact us. You can contact your city or state and find out if those are actual eligible grants. You can actually go to grants.gov, and all grants are going to be listed there that are available. Not local grants, but anything that starts from the federal government. It's going to appear, it's going to come from grants.gov. So it looks as though organizations that are out to scam businesses do very well with their SEO practices, meaning you can type in government grant or a certain word, and the fake account is going to show up before the .gov one. We want to make sure that you take a moment and look at where those are coming from, because again, they're very sophisticated, and we need to protect the companies of Greater Vancouver region. How do we know if ones are scamming us? So oftentimes the Office of Inspector General, the OIG, is going to be the one organization, it's an agency of the federal government that ensures the integrity of grants. So we work with the Office of Inspector General will issue scam alerts. So if you want to, you can always go on to the OIG and look for scam alerts. We will also try and let people know if there's one in particular that's hitting our region that people could come prey to. But as far as the OIG, that's going to be something that they help to oversee and are kind of like a watchdog of these programs. On the flip side, there are companies that do set up shop, companies maybe in our region that set up shop, and they are intentionally going out to commit fraud and to take advantage of grants that are not made for them. So the OIG is also used for us, our granting agencies, organizations on up, to report anybody that misuses or sets out to defraud a federal program. So they are going to be a watchdog. Now, the one thing that I will say is if you put a wrong UBI, a tax ID number, that's not defrauding the federal government. So these are companies that are set out specifically to defraud the federal government, can find themselves into a lot of trouble with the OIG. Because one of the things that we want to remember, and I put this on here for a reason, the money that we're using, the money that grants come from, those are federal grants, those are taxpayer dollars, those are your dollars, those are my dollars. So we want to make sure that when we apply for grants, we're applying for grants for the right reason, that we're using them for the right reason. And as administrators of the grant on our end, it's our job in order to look at each one of these applications to make sure that everybody there should be getting the grant and that they're not one of those actors that are trying to take advantage of a program that could get the program eliminated. So that's part of our responsibility. Federal grants, they don't have fees associated with them. So if you're going for a grant at the federal level, whether it's through us or up the chain, directly to the federal government or directly to the state, they usually do not have fees associated with them. They can sometimes have an application fee as a pass-through, but that's going to be very rare. And a lot of times that happens because if you get a pool of 1,000 companies, but really only 400 of them really truly should have applied, meaning they meet the requirements and the guidelines, then a $250 application fee, a $200, $100, sometimes that's enough to make sure people think twice about applying for a grant that they know right off the bat they don't qualify for. But grants, federal grants, are free. They can also be looked up at your local library, and other grants can be looked up at your local library as well. So I would definitely check out some opportunities at your local library once we're able to go back there. I'm not sure if they're open right now, but you can find them online and you can find them through your library and to assist you in some of the efforts on researching what grants are available. And then another time to plug grants.gov. They really are the only official grant making agency. So if it's a federal grant, it's on grants.gov. If you have questions about a grant's legitimacy, it's on grants.gov. So I'll have you check that out and get familiar with that. Now, we've got some fun facts about grants that I wanted to share as well as we wrap this up. The first one is, did you know Ulysses S. Grant didn't have S as his middle name? So that's a fun fact about Grant. He is the 18th president, and I had a book report on him when I was in 5th grade. I thought I would never use the information, but here I am. I think Ulysses is actually his middle name, in case you cared. So another fact, did you know approximately 30% of federal dollars are fraudulently spent? I say this because it gives us an understanding of the importance and why the federal government puts importance on that OMB, that arm we heard about, the IRS, the regulatory arm. That is why, because these taxpayer dollars are yours and mine, and this is across every agency. These are not just grants. It's across every type of government program. 30% of them are fraudulently spent. So not so fun fact, but it is an important fact. And the best fact out there for us at the Chamber of Commerce, and for those of you who are on this call, these grants can save our businesses of Southwest Washington. They can save your operations. They can help offset payroll. So please take a moment, research the opportunities, put in the right information, and let's give you the maximum opportunity to receive grants in this region. So while this was a lot of information, the one takeaway I wanted to make sure that that you had was the importance about grants, the regulatory nature that comes with it. And you might not know that filling out an application online, what's happening behind the scenes, but there's a lot that's happening behind the scenes, and you can help us help you. I think there's a movie with that, but I'm not going to say it. I think that grants are going to be very key in the coming months, especially during the grant recovery efforts. And I want to make sure every single company provides correct information, applies right away. So we have people that apply for grants. If we have a grant open for 4 weeks, sorry, it could be sold out. It could be oversubscribed in less than 5-6 hours. We never know how many people are going to apply for a grant. So oftentimes we want to open it up for a large enough window, but oftentimes we just don't have the capacity to go down the line. So if you say to yourself, I don't have the information right now, I am going to fill that out tomorrow, or I've just got a lot on my plate, I'm going to wait till this weekend, things settle down, I'm back at home, you might have lost out on an opportunity, and we don't want you to lose out on an opportunity. So let's get the information prepared. Let's have a cheat sheet for ourselves at the company, put it on your phone. I actually have our organization's UBI number, our tax ID number, our SOL account number, everything on my phone. Hopefully nobody's a hacker on this call, but I keep it with me because we oftentimes get asked not for grants necessarily, but for information that's needed ASAP. And I have access to all that with me. And I'm hoping that this might create people to be a little bit better prepared, because again, we want that grant. You're going to start seeing more grant opportunities coming your way. I think everybody heard the governor's announcement that there's more grant money being disseminated throughout the state of Washington, especially down here in Southwest Washington. And we want to make sure that you understand that us and our partners are going to be asking for more money, and make sure that we get Southwest Washington a good pool of money in order to keep our businesses alive here. So hopefully everybody found this helpful. Thank you for a lot of the comments. That's very sweet. I'm glad you found it useful. And if there's ever a need for more information, please contact your Chamber of Commerce. We are here to make sure that the process is easy, that business thrives here in our region, and advocate on your behalf. That's the way things get done. And we're more than happy to hear what you have to say. And if you need any assistance on anything business related, please make us your first call, and we'll get you to the right partner if it's not us.